Adrian once believed in the unshakable bond of brotherhood, but my best friend stole everything from me. The dream we built together was shattered in front of my eyes, and the person I trusted most left me with nothing but broken promises. Why would the one I called a brother betray me? How could someone I sacrificed everything for turn against me? And what happens when loyalty is nothing more than a mask hiding greed? Adrian and Marcus grew up side by side in a neighborhood where dreams were fragile things, often broken before they could bloom. Adrian's life was shaped by the scent of sawdust and varnish in his father's small carpenter shop. His father would always remind him, "A man's greatest wealth is his integrity. You can lose everything else, Adrian, but if you lose that, you're poor forever." Adrian absorbed those words like scripture, believing patience and honesty were the foundation of any future worth building. Marcus lived by different rules. His father was gone, and his exhausted mother worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. One evening, Marcus watched in silence as their landlord dumped their furniture on the street because the rent wasn't paid. That night, a fire lit inside him. He told himself, "I'll never be powerless again. If I want something, I'll take it before anyone takes it from me." 2 boys from different worlds but the same broken streets found each other. Adrian was thoughtful, cautious, and creative. Marcus was bold, daring, and persuasive. Their friendship was magnetic. Where one hesitated, the other pushed forward. Where one saw risk, the other saw opportunity. But what Adrian saw as balance, Marcus always saw as leverage. One day in high school, Marcus got caught cheating on a test. The teacher was furious, threatening to expel him. Before Marcus could speak, Adrian stepped forward and claimed the answers were his, insisting Marcus had only glanced by mistake. Adrian was suspended, carrying the weight of Marcus's mistake. Marcus laughed it off afterward, slapping Adrian's back. "Man, you're too good for this world. I owe you one." But deep inside, Marcus learned something more dangerous. Adrian would carry the blame for him even at great cost. That moment became the first silent crack in their friendship, a betrayal disguised as loyalty. But Adrian, blinded by the idea of brotherhood, never questioned it. By 17 they were inseparable. They skipped parties to sketch clothing designs and wore notebooks. They spoke about how they'd one day build something of their own, something that would free them from the weight of their past. Marcus would grin and say, "We'll rise together or not at all." Adrian believed him. Why wouldn't he? They were brothers in every way that mattered. But words are easy when you're young. Promises sound eternal until money, ambition, and survival test them. And when that test came, only one of them remembered the promise. Adrian believed ideas were like seeds. You had to plant them carefully, water them with patience, and wait for the right season. Marcus believed differently. To him, ideas were sparks. You had to catch them, fuel them, and turn them into a fire before someone else stole the flame. They both wanted the same thing, freedom from the weight of their past. But the way they viewed the path forward was already splitting into 2. The dream was born in Adrian's garage. It wasn't much, just a cracked concrete floor, a broken fan buzzing in the corner, and a workbench covered with scraps of fabric and half-finished sketches. But to them it was sacred ground. Here they stayed up late with worn pencils and borrowed sewing kits, imagining a clothing brand that spoke to kids like them. The forgotten, the underestimated, the dreamers in places where no one expected dreams to survive. Adrian sketched designs that told stories, shirts that bore messages about struggle, survival, and hope. Marcus saw potential in every design, but while Adrian saw art, Marcus saw money. "Man, you don't even realize it," Marcus said one night, spinning a sketch pad in his hands. "This isn't just clothing. This is a movement. People will line up for this. We just have to push harder, think bigger, move faster." Adrian smiled, tired but steady. "Bigger isn't always better. If we move too fast, we'll lose what makes it real." Marcus groaned. "There you go again, slow and steady. You sound like your dad." "Look, no one cares about integrity if you're broke. People care about winning." That word, winning, echoed differently in their hearts. For Adrian, winning meant building something honest, something lasting. For Marcus, winning meant escaping the weakness of his past by any means necessary. Adrian's father often came into the garage, wiping sawdust from his hands. He'd watch the boys sketch and argue, and then he'd remind them, "Remember, not every partner is a brother. Business tests loyalty in ways friendship never will." Adrian nodded, taking his father's words as wisdom. Marcus, though polite, rolled his eyes the moment the man left. To him, warnings were just obstacles dressed as advice. Despite their differences, the garage came alive with hope. They printed their first shirts using borrowed money. They sold them at school, then at local street corners. Each sale felt like a victory, proof that they could carve out their place in the world. Adrian called it a miracle. Marcus called it a start. One night, after counting the few crumpled bills they'd earned, Marcus looked at Adrian with a grin that masked desperation. "We'll rise together or not at all." Adrian believed him, deep in his bones. The words felt like a sacred vow. But promises in the dark can shine bright in the moment, only to burn out under the harsh light of ambition. What Adrian thought was unity, Marcus was already shaping into strategy. And the fire that began in a cracked garage would one day burn them both. Success didn't arrive overnight, but it came fast enough to feel like a storm. What started with a handful of shirts in Adrian's garage turned into dozens of orders from local schools and community centers. Teenagers wore their designs like badges of honor, and suddenly Adrian and Marcus weren't just kids from the block. They were entrepreneurs with a vision. But with every order that came in, the differences between them grew louder. Adrian saw each sale as proof that staying true to their roots mattered. Marcus saw each sale as a stepping stone toward something bigger, something louder, something faster. At first, the tension showed in small ways. Adrian wanted to reinvest slowly, buying better materials and improving quality. Marcus wanted to cut costs and push volume. Adrian cared about the stories behind the shirts, the message of resilience stitched into every design. Marcus cared about profit margins, marketing stunts, and how quickly they could scale. One evening, as they sat in the garage folding freshly printed shirts, Marcus slammed his fist against the table. "You're too careful, Adrian. People out there are hungry. They want to belong to something. We've got their attention now, but attention fades if you don't move fast." Adrian looked up, calm but firm. "And what happens when we move so fast that we forget why we started? This isn't just about money. It's about giving people something real." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Real doesn't pay bills. Real doesn't get you out of this neighborhood." The words stung. Adrian wanted to argue, but somewhere inside he knew Marcus wasn't wrong. Yet he also knew something else. If they sold out too quickly, they'd lose the heart of everything they had built. Foreshadowing lingered in the air that night. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He quickly flipped it over, dismissing it when Adrian noticed. "Who was that?" Adrian asked casually. "No one. Just a friend." Marcus's answer was too quick, too practiced. Adrian didn't press, but the seed of doubt planted itself silently in his mind. Despite disagreements, their reputation grew. Local influencers started wearing their clothes. Street corners turned into pop-up shops. Money began to flow in, but so did attention from outsiders who smelled opportunity. A few investors approached them, promising big things if they could expand production. Adrian hesitated. Marcus's eyes lit up. Late one night, after an investor meeting Adrian refused to attend, Marcus stood outside the garage, staring at the city skyline. "We're so close," he whispered to himself. "But he's holding me back." Back inside, Adrian was sketching quietly, unaware of the storm brewing beside him. He still believed Marcus was his brother, his partner, his other half. But Marcus had already begun to see Adrian not as a partner, but as an obstacle. The brand was rising, their bond was cracking, and the promise of "we rise together or not at all" was starting to sound less like a vow and more like a lie waiting to be told. Adrian believed their brand belonged to both of them, born from late nights in a broken garage. But Marcus had already begun shaping a different story, one where he was the visionary, the leader, the face everyone recognized. It started small. At events, when reporters asked about the brand, Marcus spoke first. He told stories about their struggles and victories, often framing himself as the driver of their success. Adrian didn't mind at first. He hated the spotlight and preferred working quietly on the designs. But what he didn't see was how people began to associate Marcus with the brand, while Adrian faded into the background. Lena noticed it before he did. She had been with Adrian since high school, back when all he had were sketches and dreams. She admired his patience, his values, the way he always chose integrity over shortcuts. But she also saw what Adrian refused to see: Marcus's growing hunger. "Don't you think he takes a little too much credit?" Lena asked one evening as they sat on the porch eating cheap takeout. Adrian shrugged, brushing it off. "He's just better at talking to people. I'm fine being behind the scenes." "But are you fine with being erased?" she asked, her voice steady. The question lingered. Adrian laughed it off, but a shadow of doubt flickered in his chest. Meanwhile, the community that had supported them began to split in their loyalty. The kids who wore their shirts saw Marcus as the charismatic leader who gave them hope. They didn't see Adrian's sketches, his late nights, his quiet sacrifices. They saw Marcus on Instagram posing with influencers, hyping up the brand, making promises about expansion and opportunity. Adrian's father noticed too. One night he pulled Adrian aside in the workshop. "Son, I've built cabinets with men who promised loyalty until payday came. Business doesn't change people, it reveals them. Don't ignore the signs." Adrian nodded, but his heart refused to believe it. He clung to the memory of two boys sketching in a garage, promising to rise together. Marcus, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. He started meeting with investors behind Adrian's back, positioning himself as the sole visionary. He began introducing himself at events as the founder, instead of one of the founders. Each time it chipped away at the truth. The first major crack appeared when Marcus signed a deal for a promotional campaign without consulting Adrian. Adrian found out when he saw their designs plastered across social media with a flashy new logo Marcus had approved alone. "This isn't what we agreed on," Adrian said, confronting him. Marcus smirked. "This is what growth looks like. You worry too much about details. People don't care about sketches, they care about image." Adrian clenched his fists, but before he could argue further, Marcus added a dagger. "You should be grateful. Without me, no one would even know this brand exists." Adrian said nothing. But in that silence, a truth was born. His best friend wasn't just drifting away. He was rewriting history one story at a time. Adrian always believed conflicts could be solved with patience and dialogue. But Marcus thrived on conflict. He used it as fuel, bending arguments until they worked in his favor. Their partnership had survived small disagreements, but now the stakes were higher, and the cracks were impossible to ignore. The brand was gaining real momentum. Orders poured in from outside the city and social media was buzzing. Investors began circling like hawks, eager to profit from the raw energy surrounding the movement. Adrian wanted to scale slowly, ensuring quality and authenticity. Marcus wanted to sign the biggest deal possible, no matter the fine print. One night, Adrian walked into their office, a rented space far from the humble garage where it all began, and found Marcus shaking hands with a man in a tailored suit. Papers were spread across the table. "What's going on?" Adrian asked, his voice cautious. Marcus's grin was too wide. "Adrian, meet Mr. Cole. He's offering us distribution on a national scale. Stores in every major city. This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Adrian skimmed the contract. His chest tightened. Hidden fees. Clauses that gave away creative control. A deal that valued speed over substance. "This isn't right," Adrian said, dropping the papers on the table. "They'll own us. Our designs will be theirs. Everything we worked for will just be a logo they exploit." Marcus's smile faltered, then hardened. "You're overthinking it as usual. This is the chance of a lifetime." Adrian shook his head. "No. It's not worth selling our soul." Marcus's jaw clenched. "You sound just like your father. Always preaching about integrity." "Integrity doesn't pay the bills, Adrian. This deal makes us untouchable." Lena arrived later that night, finding Adrian sitting alone in the dark office. She listened as he explained the contract, Marcus's determination, his refusal to see reason. "Adrian," she said softly, "he's not protecting your dream anymore. He's chasing his own. And if you don't stop him now, you'll lose everything." Adrian buried his face in his hands. "He's my brother. I can't just walk away." Lena's reply was a whisper sharp as glass. "Then prepare to be stabbed in the back by your own brother." The next day their fight erupted in front of their small team. Adrian refused to sign the deal. Marcus accused him of sabotaging their future. Words flew like knives. "You're holding me back," Marcus shouted. "You're too scared to see the bigger picture. And you're too blind to see what this will cost us." Adrian shot back. For the first time the room chose sides. Some employees glanced at Marcus with admiration, drawn to his confidence. Others looked at Adrian with sympathy, sensing the weight of his values. The brotherhood that once felt unbreakable now stood fractured, each man staring at the other not as a partner but as an enemy. And though neither of them admitted it out loud, they both knew something had shattered that could never be repaired. Adrian thought the fight over the contract would be their lowest point, but betrayal rarely announces itself so clearly. It doesn't always come with shouts and broken promises. It comes quietly, slipping in through signatures, whispers, and lies dressed as ambition. The following week, Adrian arrived at their office to find chaos. Employees rushed back and forth, phones rang endlessly, and in the center stood Marcus, smiling like a king crowned at last. Behind him hung a banner with their brand's logo, but it was altered, sleeker, corporate, stripped of the raw soul Adrian had poured into it. "What is this?" Adrian asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Marcus turned, his smile sharp. "Progress. We closed the deal, Adrian. The investors are in. We're going national." Adrian froze. "We closed the deal? I didn't sign anything." Marcus's eyes gleamed. "You didn't have to. I signed as founder. They only needed one." The words hit like a blade. Founder. Not co-founder. Not partner. Just founder. Adrian stepped forward, anger boiling. "You had no right. Those designs, they're mine. You can't just hand them over." Marcus leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. "Correction, they were yours. Now they belong to the company. My company." The room spun. Employees avoided Adrian's gaze, afraid to choose sides. Investor shook his hand politely but quickly moved to Marcus, showering him with praise. Adrian stormed out, his chest heavy with rage and betrayal. That night he sat with Lena, pouring out everything. She listened quietly before asking one question. "Why did you trust him more than yourself?" The truth was unbearable. Adrian had ignored every warning sign. His father's words, Lena's caution, even his own doubts, because he believed in brotherhood more than he believed in betrayal. But Marcus had no such illusions. He had already begun reshaping the narrative publicly. On social media, Marcus positioned himself as the genius behind the brand, the visionary who turned sketches into an empire. Interviews painted Adrian as a small contributor, someone who helped in the early days, but couldn't keep up. Adrian's name was being erased from his own dream. The betrayal deepened when Adrian discovered Marcus had filed paperwork transferring ownership rights, using designs Adrian had created late at night in that garage. He had proof, but Marcus had the investors, the money, and the spotlight. Lena begged him to fight back legally, but Adrian hesitated. Lawsuits meant dragging their brotherhood through the mud, exposing wounds he wasn't ready to confront. One evening, Adrian confronted Marcus one last time. "Why, Marcus? We built this together. Why throw it all away?" Marcus's smile was cold, his words dripping with the same fire he had carried since that night on the curb as a child. "Because I promised myself I'd never be powerless again. And you, Adrian, you were my weakness. But now I've cut it off." Adrian walked away in silence, but his heart knew. His best friend hadn't just stolen his brand. He had stolen his story, his identity, his very place in the world. And betrayal this deep doesn't just end a friendship, it begins a war. Adrian once walked into rooms as a co-founder, a visionary, half of a rising force. But after Marcus's betrayal, he walked through the same streets as if invisible. His name no longer opened doors. His designs, his ideas, his sweat, all carried Marcus's signature now. Adrian was a ghost haunting a world he built. He tried to fight back at first. He showed sketches to prove they were his. He confronted investors, reminding them of the nights in the garage when the brand was nothing but pencil lines and borrowed thread. But no one listened. To the world, Marcus was the brand, and Adrian was just a forgotten helper bitter about being left behind. Social media became a weapon Marcus wielded masterfully. Every post painted him as the self-made visionary. Every interview rewrote history. Adrian's name was rarely mentioned, and when it was, it came with dismissive phrases: an old partner, a creative assistant, someone who couldn't keep up. The humiliation cut deeper than the loss. Adrian withdrew. He stopped answering calls. He barely left his father's workshop, sitting for hours staring at empty wood panels that reminded him of designs he'd never reclaim. Nights were worse, dark, silent hours where he replayed every warning he'd ignored. Lena's words. His father's wisdom. Even Marcus's early betrayals, small and disguised as jokes. He saw the foreshadowing now, sharp as knives. "Why didn't I see it?" he whispered one night, head in his hands. Lena sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You saw it, Adrian. You just didn't want to believe it. Because you loved him like a brother." Her words broke him, but they also planted a seed. Betrayal hurts most when it comes from love, but it also forces you to decide who you are without that love. The community's reaction was divided. Some sympathized, whispering about how Marcus had stolen the dream. Others shrugged, saying Adrian was just too soft, too slow, too unwilling to fight. Each whisper was a dagger, reminding him that loyalty doesn't always earn respect. His father tried to reach him too. One evening, the old man set down his tools and said, "Son, wood only becomes strong after it survives the fire. You've been burned. Now decide, will you turn to ash or to steel?" Adrian listened, but silence was still his companion. He wandered the streets, watching strangers wear the clothes he designed, hearing them cheer Marcus's name. Every sight reminded him of loss. Every voice reminded him of betrayal. But one night, standing outside the garage where it all began, Adrian placed his hand on the cracked door and felt something stir inside him. This place wasn't Marcus's. This place was his. And the story wasn't over, not yet. He had lost everything, yes. But sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what cannot be stolen. And for the first time in months, Adrian whispered to himself, "I will rise again." Adrian had lost everything. His brand, his reputation, even the brotherhood he once believed unshakable. But loss, when carried long enough, transforms. At first it weighs you down. But eventually, it sharpens you, reshaping grief into resolve. He started small. Not with flashy logos or grand promises, but with a notebook and a pen. Every night in the garage, the same garage Marcus had abandoned, Adrian sketched again. His designs were different now, darker yet more powerful, each line carved with pain, each symbol carrying the weight of betrayal and rebirth. Lena stood by him. She didn't push, didn't pressure. She simply reminded him, gently but firmly, "Your story isn't over. He may have stolen your name, but he can't steal your truth." Word spread quietly among those who had truly known him. A few loyal customers from the early days reached out, asking if he was still designing. Some local kids, the ones who remembered the garage nights, came back to help. Adrian gave them tasks, folding shirts, testing fabrics, sharing stories. They weren't an empire, but they were a family, built not on ambition but on loyalty. Meanwhile, Marcus soared. His face plastered billboards. His brand hit national stores. But success is greedy, it always asks for more. Investors demanded rapid growth, and Marcus, desperate to maintain his throne, cut corners Adrian would never have accepted. Cheaper fabrics. Mass production. Design stripped of meaning. The contrast became visible. Customers began to complain online, "The quality isn't the same, the message feels empty now." Marcus brushed it off, confident his charisma would keep people loyal. But Adrian knew better, hollow roots cannot sustain a tree for long. One evening, Adrian's father found him sketching by candlelight. "You've grown quiet, son," he said, placing a hand on Adrian's shoulder. "But quiet doesn't mean weak. It means focused. Let your silence build a storm." And that storm was coming. Adrian launched a small line under a new name, one that carried no trace of Marcus but every trace of truth. The designs told raw stories of betrayal, resilience, and the fight to reclaim dignity. The pieces weren't just clothing, they were confessions stitched into fabric. The response was modest at first, but the community who had watched Adrian fall rallied behind him. Local artists, small shop owners, and even students began wearing his clothes proudly. They weren't following a brand, they were standing with a man who refused to die in silence. Lena looked at him one night as orders trickled in. "You know he'll see this as a threat." Adrian's eyes, once filled with despair, now burned with quiet fire. "Good. Let him." Because Marcus thought he had stolen everything. But he hadn't stolen Adrian's vision. He hadn't stolen his integrity. And most importantly, he hadn't stolen the loyalty of those who could still see the truth. For the first time in a long time, Adrian wasn't chasing revenge. He was chasing redemption. But sometimes, redemption is the sharpest revenge of all. Adrian never wanted war, but betrayal rarely leaves room for peace. His quiet comeback was gaining momentum. Local press picked up his story, the forgotten founder, the true heart behind the brand. His new line wasn't just fashion, it was testimony, and people connected to it in ways Marcus's glossy empire could no longer reach. But Marcus noticed. And Marcus didn't forgive threats. At first, Marcus dismissed Adrian's rebirth as a petty attempt at relevance. But when Adrian's line sold out at a community pop-up event, right across the street from a flagship store Marcus had opened, the insult was too loud to ignore. Crowds cheered Adrian's name. Hashtags trended online. Hashtag the real visionary, hashtag stolen dreams. Marcus responded with fury. He accused Adrian publicly in an interview. "These are bitter lies from someone who abandoned the vision when it got too real. He's trying to tear down what I built." Adrian stayed silent, refusing to fight fire with fire. But silence too is a weapon. And in Marcus's arrogance, the world began to notice cracks in his story. The breaking point came during a live panel hosted by a major magazine. Both were invited. Marcus as the face of a national empire, Adrian as the rising underdog reclaiming his voice. Cameras flashed. The room buzzed. The stage was set for a collision years in the making. Marcus took the microphone first, his charm polished, his words sharp. "This brand is bigger than one person. It's about the community, about giving people a chance to belong. I created that. And I'll protect it from anyone trying to destroy it. Adrian sat quietly, his turn arriving like a storm cloud. When he finally stood, his voice was calm but heavy with truth. We started this in a garage, he said, eyes locking on Marcus. Two boys who believed in rising together. But somewhere along the way, rising turned into stepping on the very people who helped build it. Integrity was traded for speed. Meaning was traded for profit. And loyalty was traded for ego. The crowd shifted. Murmurs spread. Some nodded. Others glanced at Marcus, waiting for his rebuttal. Marcus forced a laugh. You see? Emotional. That's why I had to take control, because he couldn't handle the weight. But the audience wasn't convinced. Cameras zoomed in on Marcus's clenched jaw, Adrian's steady gaze. For the first time, the narrative wasn't in Marcus's control. After the panel, reporters swarmed Adrian. Headlines erupted the next morning, betrayed but not broken. Adrian versus Marcus. The truth behind the brand. Marcus's empire began to wobble. Investors questioned him. Customers compared the hollow quality of his clothes to the soul stitched into Adrian's. For years, Marcus had rewritten history. But now history was speaking back. And though the crowd cheered Adrian that night, none of them knew. The greatest twist was still waiting in the shadows, ready to rewrite the ending of this story forever. Adrian thought the worst was behind him. He had faced humiliation, betrayal, and loss. But standing on the edge of redemption, he was about to learn that betrayal rarely ends with just one knife. Weeks after the showdown panel, Adrian's new line was thriving. Orders poured in, interviews celebrated him as the underdog who refused to die. For the first time in years, he walked with his head high. Lena's hand in his reminded him he wasn't alone. The storm was over, or so he thought. But storms don't end, they change shape. Late one evening, Adrian received an anonymous envelope at the garage. Inside were legal documents, patents, ownership transfers, hidden contracts Marcus had signed years ago. But what chilled Adrian wasn't Marcus's name on the forms. It was Lena's. She had signed as a silent co-founder in Marcus's new company. She had witnessed the contracts. She had been in meetings Adrian never knew about. Adrian's breath caught. His hands trembled. He confronted her that night, documents spread across the table. Tell me this isn't true, Adrian whispered, his voice breaking. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but her silence screamed louder than words. Finally she spoke. I loved you, Adrian. I still do. But I also wanted security. I wanted to believe Marcus's vision because yours felt too slow, too fragile. I thought I could protect you by being close to him. I was wrong. The betrayal burned deeper than Marcus's. Adrian had expected knives from rivals, but not from the woman who held his heart. Why? He asked, his voice hollow. Lena's answer was a whisper that cut like glass. Because I didn't think you'd survive without me. Adrian staggered back, realizing the truth. Marcus hadn't stolen everything. Lena had handed him the final piece. But here was the twist. The documents also revealed Marcus's empire was crumbling faster than anyone knew. Investors were pulling out, lawsuits loomed, and the empire was drowning in debt. Marcus had built a castle on sand, and Lena had hitched her fate to a sinking ship. Adrian didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply folded the papers, his voice calm. Then you've betrayed yourself more than me. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's empire collapsed spectacularly. News outlets turned on him, investors fled, and customers abandoned the brand. Adrian's line, humble yet honest, became the new symbol of resilience. But the story wasn't clean. It wasn't victory without scars. Adrian had his brand back, yes, but not his brother. Not his lover. And not the innocence he once carried. As he stood in the garage, the place where it all began, Adrian whispered the words Marcus once swore, "We rise together or not at all." But now he knew the truth. They hadn't risen together. They hadn't fallen together. They had destroyed each other. And sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't losing what's stolen. It's realizing the people you loved most were the ones holding the knife all along.